Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this January 2nd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Tonight in the news, my friends, is a story related to the first seal of Revelation, Revelation 6, the white horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as religious deception and things to do involving religion, and especially, as I said, deception. More than 300 Bibles from the Bible Society have been seized by the Islamic authorities in Malaysia because they use the word Allah to refer to God. People of all faiths use the word Allah in Malay to refer to their gods, but a court ruled in October that non-Muslims could not use it. But there are claims that the row is political, a way for Prime Minister Razak to boost his support with the Muslim majority, as well as to deflect attention from his cuts to food and fuel. Jonathan Joseph has this report.
The argument over the Bibles in the boxes is sharpening divisions between Malaysia's religious communities. Seized in a raid by the Islamic authorities because they use the word Allah to refer to God. Long-running contentions over the word saw two Bible Society leaders in Selangor State taken to this police station. After statements, they were released on bail.
It was a very physical affair. I was surrounded by a group of them speaking loudly and threatening me. So eventually we let them in, and they searched our premises, went through our books. They seized 16 boxes of Bibles, 321 Malay Bibles, and 10 copies of the Bab Kudus, which is the Iban Bible.
Court battles over the word Allah have dragged on for years, with decisions going both ways. The Malay Muslims protesting here believe Christians are trying to convert their followers, and that using Allah to refer to God is part of that plan. The government has backed them, fearing more attacks on churches. Christians say they've used the word Allah for God since before Malaysia's formation. Some believe the battle is political. Prime Minister Najib Razak wants the backing of the Muslim majority and the ethnic minorities. There are also perceptions he's trying to deflect attention from cuts to food and fuel subsidies.
It is started by the federal government, and it's up to Najib to stop it based on his own so-called version of moderation that he has been preaching.
Parts of the governing coalition are threatening protests outside churches on Sunday, something the police have warned against. But it leaves Christians feeling threatened once again. Jonathan Josephs, BBC News.
Well, friends, that story relates to the first seal of Revelation. Again, the white horse, the horse of religious deception. This next report from the Beirut picks up where we left off last year with the red horse, with internal civil strife, war, rumors of war, people killing one another, more car bombs. The BBC's Rami Ruhaimian reports from Beirut.
The figure was revised to 4, the death toll, but the number of wounded seems to have gone up to 60. Of course, many people have been wounded by pieces of glass because the explosion was also very loud and the glass came shattering down in many of the nearby buildings. It's a very crowded residential area, so the number of wounded is likely to go up. Fortunately, many of those are lightly wounded, not very dangerously wounded because of shards of glass, but we still are not sure how many people have been killed so far, and the figure could go up.
And just looking on Twitter, Rami, lots of people are speculating this is related to the Syrian conflict. Do we have any idea of who was targeted and who carried this out?
No idea so far, but we know that many groups fighting the government in Syria have threatened such attacks against Hezbollah. Hezbollah, of course, is heavily involved alongside the government in Syria. In the conflict over there, they are very efficient fighters, and their intervention has been seen by both sides to be forceful and decisive in many key battles in Syria. So it is quite likely that there is a link. We don't know for a fact, but that is quite likely. Also, 2 days ago, there was an announcement of the arrest of Majid al-Majid, who is the leader of one group that not only threatened but carried out, or at least claimed responsibility for a number of attacks, including the attack against the Iranian embassy in Beirut. He was arrested in Lebanon a couple of days ago, and he has been saying that there will be attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and especially in Beirut, because of Hezbollah's involvement in Syria.
And Rami, we've had this attack today. Last week, a high-profile political advisor was assassinated. Has this violence affected life in Beirut? Is it noticeable there are more precautions being taken?
Well, the precautions are mostly noticeable after such attacks. Of course, Beirut, or a very main street in downtown Beirut, was cut off for a couple of days after the explosion you mentioned, in which Mohammed Shattah, the former government minister, was assassinated. Quite likely that there will be similar disruption in Dahi, in the southern suburbs of Beirut, in the coming hours and maybe even days, as the investigation goes on over there into this latest attack. However, there is also, of course, the country is always shocked and shaken by such attacks, but it's become almost a part of life here in Lebanon. Many people are beginning to draw comparisons between Lebanon and Iraq. It's not as bad, of course, as the situation in Iraq, but there is a lot going on, and a lot of it is clearly related to what's going on in Syria.
Friends, the condition of Israel's former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who has been in a coma since 2006, has worsened. And he's now in critical condition according to doctors. Mr. Sharon, 85, is suffering from a malfunction of several organs, including the kidneys, they said. The BBC's Kevin Connolly has more on this and details about Mr. Sharon's impact during his time in politics.
At the Sheba Medical Center near Tel Aviv, Israel waits anxiously for a medical bulletin on the health of the former Prime Minister, who's been in a coma for 8 years. When the news comes, it's not good.
Mr. Ariel Sharon, who is hospitalized in our hospital for the last 7 years, shows some signs of deterioration during the following 2 days, with some critical misfunction or malfunction of some of its organs, including his kidneys. He is under, I would say, our treatment, but we feel that the situation is critical and some danger is expected for his life.
Ariel Sharon's life may be slipping away now, but back in his heyday they called him the bulldozer, a forceful soldier and politician who saw himself as an uncompromising defender of his country's interests in war and in peace.
We remember his contributions, sacrifices he made to ensure the survival and the well-being of Israel. And I have many personal thoughts about my meetings with him on many different occasions. Always robust and strong and clear about his positions.
His name may be forever associated with the massacre inside Palestinian refugee camps carried out by Christian militias in Lebanon during Israel's invasion of 1982. But Ariel Sharon's life story was bound up with the history of his country from the moment of its birth. He fought in its War of Independence in 1948. Israel's enemies hated Ariel Sharon, but its people will remember him as someone whose career dated back to the very foundation of their state. Now they wait with concern as his fate again hangs in the balance. Kevin Connolly, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Friends, in our next story, it relates to the fourth seal, the pale horse, Revelation 6. Let's take a look at our chart. We haven't had that up yet tonight. This pale horse has a rider whose name is Death. And alongside this pale horse and its rider, again the rider named Death, rides Hades, hell, the grave. And one of the terms Jesus Christ used, of three different terms that he used to describe in plain language the activities of this horse, was loimos. In the Greek, loimos, you look it up in an English Greek lexicon, it means disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. There are two other terms that Christ used, but for this story tonight, that covers it right there. Loimos, the disease epidemics. And in the UK, in England, the Midlands there has one of the biggest rat problems in the UK, with households calling pest control experts more than any other region. That's the Midlands of the UK. In some parts of the country, rats are even becoming resistant to traditional poisons. And David Gregory Kamar has this report.
In the Midlands, and especially Birmingham, you're never far from a rat. So not surprisingly, Birmingham is the place in the UK that makes the most calls to pest control experts like Carl Richards.
So what are these holes? Is this the side of a rat?
These are rat burrows, which is typical of quite a fairly size infestation.
Traditional traps entice the rats in with poison bait, but there's no way to control the amount they eat or the dose of poison they get.
The problem is, in some parts of the country, rats are becoming resistant to the poisons we use to kill them, and they're passing that resistance on to their offspring. We're looking at a new generation of poison-resistant super rats.
Scientists worry it's going to take more and more poison to do the job, and that poses problems.
We're putting more poison there to actually kill the rats that are freely roaming in these areas. And you just often don't notice that there's that massive amount of poison hidden in a little black box at the side of the road or the side of your house.
But at the University of Aston, they're working on a completely new type of rat trap that avoids all these problems.
Our rat trap works by spraying the rats with a toxin, so unlike normal traps, they don't have to eat this poison. They're actually dosed with it, so they receive one fixed dose, and they go on to die from that poison at a later time.
The rat enters the trap and breaks a laser beam that allows an inbuilt computer to work out how big the rat is and the precise dose of poison to spray directly onto the skin of the rat to kill it.
It's not just Birmingham and the Midlands, of course. Worldwide, rats are a huge problem, carrying disease and damaging crops. So a new form of rat control would bring real benefits for everyone.
David Gregory Kumar, BBC News, Birmingham.
Friends, if I remember correctly, it was the rats that were the big spreaders of the Black Plague that was such a disease epidemic problem just some decades ago, and primarily out of England. But it could become a worldwide problem, and people in the United States are not immune, where we sometimes see numerous rats. It's a good thing to have a cat around. Maybe you got some stray cats, start feeding them. Let them hang around your house and chase away these rodents, varmints that they are, the disease-carrying varmints, as the man well pointed out. Well, another story out of England, again, this next one, also related to the fourth seal. Now I'm going to bring that seal back, the chart back up that we use in a moment. That's got the first 6 seals on the left side of it. It's got the 7th seal only on the right side, because the 7th seal, where we get 777 from, is composed, that 7th seal is composed of 7 trumpets, and then the 7th trumpet is composed of 7 last plagues. Let me just pop that up on the screen for a moment. Whoops. Sorry about that, friends. I almost signed us out. Now, there's the left side that's got the first 6 seals on it. Let's see. We moved the buttons. So the button that would have had this light on it is now in a different place. Okay, so on the right side now you can see the 7th seal takes up that entire right side of the chart, with that 7th side being the 7th seal, and the 7th seal being composed or comprised of 7 trumpets. That 7th seal all by itself, that one seal, is 7 trumpets. And then the very last trumpet, the 7th trumpet, is composed or comprised of 7 last plagues. So this 7th seal has 7 trumpets to it, and then that last trumpet has 7 plagues to it. So that's all part of the 7th seal. And so you can see that 7th seal is a biggie, a big seal, and that 7th seal is called, all by itself, is called the Day of the Lord, a year-long period of some tremendous activity. This is the time, this seal, this is the time, the Day of the Lord is the time of God's punishment on man. Some people confuse that. We come back to the left side of your screen. You see the first 6 seals and that 5th seal, the Great Tribulation. Some people confuse the Day of the Lord on the right side, the 7th seal, with the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation. They call that, the Great Tribulation, they call that, oh, that's the Lord's punishment against man. No, that's all part of the day of man and Satan. That is Satan pouring out his wrath during the 5th seal. He's angry and he pours out some wrath, but his wrath is nothing like what God is going to be pouring out in that 7th seal. Much, much bigger seal. But now that's a little ways off. So let's come back to this chart with just the first 6 seals for a moment. These first 4 seals, of course, lead up to and work out as if they were a prelude to the 5th seal. And the prelude, when the music plays louder, you know, when you're out in the lobby of a theater where you're seeing a play and they have a break in the middle of the play. You've seen the first 4 acts and now they're about to go to Act 5, but you're out there buying your popcorn and your cola drink and your candy to come bring back in with you and eat during Act 5. Well, they'll start to play a little music a couple of minutes before the Act 5 is going to start, which means, it tells you, oh yeah, we better buy our stuff quick, hurry up, get back in there. And then just before Act 5 begins, the music gets stronger and stronger, louder and louder, and faster, telling you to hurry up, get back to your seat. The play, Act 5, is about to begin. And from the news, we're starting to see the music become stronger and stronger, speeding up and more active with all of these seals. And it's telling us, watch out, be ready, friends. Act 5, seal number 5, the Great Tribulation, that's next after these 4 are accentuated a little bit more, and then boom, seal number 5, the Great Tribulation. But on this seal number 4, the pale horse, whose rider is named Death, alongside whom Hades, hell, the grave rides, there's another activity that Jesus Christ described. And before I tell you what that one is, it's listed down there. There's loimos, there's seismos, and there is tarake in the Greek. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that like you might like it pronounced, but you go to the experts on pronunciation and they're all over the map. They're all over the place with Greek pronunciation. Nobody knows for sure how to pronounce all these various words. But so I give it a good well of a shot with tarake or tarake. That's what it kind of looks like when you look in the English Greek lexicons. And I had a year of Greek in college and a year of Hebrew related to the New Testament for the Greek and to the Old Testament for the Hebrew. But what I want to mention to you before I put the chart back up and tell you which one of those we're going to with the next story is that some of you are going to finger point a little bit and say, no, Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Herbert Armstrong, God's apostle for the end time, which he was. He indeed not only was, but he was such an apostle, let me slow down a little bit, friends. He was such an apostle for these latter days, these end times, that, and his words were so well preserved, not only his writings and publications, but recordings of his radio broadcast, audio form, and his television broadcast in video form, and some of his speaking from his headquarters, church headquarters in Pasadena, where we have the beautiful Ambassador Auditorium, were preserved videos of his speaking in Bible studies and in sermons and in other occasions. And in other cases, we just have audio from that. But much of it has been preserved, and it's as if, even though he's been in the grave for more than 2 decades, since 1986. That's more than 25 years, if my arithmetic's right, to 2014. 2016 will be 30 years, if we're still around then. But those preservations of his publications and of his words in audio and video recordings are as if he speaks from the grave. And there are many of us who have not heard everything he said, either in broadcast, television, or radio, and in sermons and in Bible studies. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of recordings. And for someone, and if you have heard them all, it's kind of almost like Solomon and all his wives and concubines. If you were, one of those women of Solomon, you were lucky to see your husband, or as if he were your husband, if you were just a concubine, once every 3 years. So if you've heard everything and seen everything that Mr. Armstrong has done, written and recorded in audio or video, by the time you've heard it all and gone through it once, why, some considerable time is going to have passed. And are you going to remember the first one you heard? Say if you could get through it all in a year. You going to remember what you heard the beginning of last year, at the beginning of the next year, after you've listened to all of that? We can just keep going over it again. And if you're like me, oftentimes I'll listen to a sermon of Mr. Armstrong, and what I got from it the first time, I listen to it again. Wow, I get something else out of it that I didn't get before. But one of the things that Mr. Armstrong himself said in a sermon in October of 1983, a sermon entitled "The Trunk of the Tree." It's available on the internet if any of you want to, have a listen. And I've got a page on one of our pages on our website. I put down his words verbatim. Maybe I'll pull that out for tomorrow night. But the essence of what he said is this, friends. He says, my job is to give you the basics, the foundation primarily, which he described to be the roots, the trunk, and the major branches of the tree. He said, I leave the smaller branches and the twigs, in other words, the details, the fine points and details, to the other ministers. So, and listen, I'm carefully explaining this, friends, because, I don't like to argue with people and get into the hassles and tassels, but some people have a very argumentative nature, or even almost a hostility in it. And I got into a situation this week where one man's sons were egging me on and asking me questions, and this and that, and well, show me this, because they disagreed with me on something that Mr. Armstrong had said in 1952 and in 1960, and they wanted to see so I said, well, you can Google it and find it yourself. But no, they wouldn't take that trouble. They made me do it. I did it for them. I went to the time and trouble to dig out some booklets that have copyrights of 1952 and 1960 in it, and photographed them, gave them the links, and said, hey, here you are. And it was almost like, show us this and then we'll believe it. Well, I should have asked them, if I do this work for you, are you going to believe it once you see it? Once I did all the work, got it all for them, then it's almost like wasn't even done. They ignored it, tossed it out the window and said, that don't count, really. They try to claim me for holding firm with Mr. Armstrong's verbiage in the earliest writings, as if I'm making some changes to Mr. Armstrong's words. Excuse me, that's a 180. How reverse a statement can you make to say when somebody's holding on to a man's words that you're changing his words? But they want to go with 1986 revisions that have improperly a 1985 copyright date on it. For a copyright to be valid in a certain year, you've got to publish at least 25 of them. The book, the modified book that they had put a 1985 copyright in it wasn't printed. 0 were printed until 1986. So technically it should have had a 1986 copyright in it. And the reason they didn't print it and release it until 1986 is because many of you know, as many of you know, Mr. Herbert Armstrong died in January 16 of 1986. So these people waited until after Mr. Armstrong died. These people, the pizzazz boys, as some of us sometimes call them, the early stages of the apostate, the pizzazz boys. They like to take Mr. Armstrong's words and water them down. You know, Mr. Armstrong knew his commission, friends, was to speak boldly and forthrightly, to cry aloud, to cry aloud, to lift up your voice like a trumpet and cry aloud and show my people their sins and to tell people the plain truth without fear. And he did that forthrightly, plainly. But people come along later and they want to make the specifics that Mr. Armstrong gave more broad and general to include everybody else but whom God was really saying, this person is your false prophet. This person from the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy. I'm not afraid to say it either, friends. I stood up against the Coast Guard when they threatened me with a Marine brig when I wouldn't come in and work as duty on Friday night, when I told him I can't work the Sabbath. I'd already worked out arrangements with my regular supervisor, but he goes on 30-day leave, and new temporary supervisor and the chief petty officer decide, the big guy's out of town. This is our chance to get Steve now. We hate this guy who's applying for a CO. He comes in the military voluntarily during the Vietnam War, but I was able to get into the Coast Guard instead of the Army and not have to go to Vietnam. Thank God. But he comes in voluntarily, and now he wants to get out on a CO and makes us have to do special arrangements to have him not working Friday night and Saturday. So they're going to get me. They change the schedule while the boss is gone. They change it Thursday night and set me up to work the next night. You know, and they have the guards escort me in handcuffs over to the Radio Shack building and initial that I've seen the changes. Okay, I initial them, they uncuff me, and next morning, early Friday, I'm in to see the temporary officer who did that, who's a young, red-haired, fresh out of officer school Catholic. And he says, when I tell him I can't work that duty, he says, Gilbert, if you're not there tonight, you're going to the Marine brig. And he says, it's a horrible place to go, and he starts describing it. And I listen to him, and when he finishes, I say, well, sir, I don't want to go to that Marine brig, but if that's the only option, I put my hands out and crossed them. I said, you might as well put the cuffs on me right now, because when nobody's on watch on that duty tonight, let it be on your head, not mine, because I told you now, and there's no question about it, sir, I will not be there on that duty on the Sabbath tonight. And let me finish. I'll tell you that story more another time, friends. I actually have really more one for our Weekend Sabbath program. But the point I'm making is this. Mr. Armstrong said in October 1983, I got to make it quick. I want to show you one story before we have to sign off. A story about some rough weather coming to the UK. In October 1983, Mr. Armstrong said, my job is to give you the basics. It's the other minister's job to give you the details. And he was saying, in other words, that the other ministers are authorized to fill in the details. And one of those details is on this chart. Mr. Armstrong mostly talked about disease epidemics, but some of our other instructors at Ambassador College would talk about the seismus and the terake, the general trouble, the less than the mega trouble of the fifth seal of Great Tribulation, but still trouble, small trouble. That's terake. And seismus is your seismic activity, your conditions related to on the ground, commotions on the ground would be your earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and floods and waters, tsunamis and flooding and wildfires and etc. And then your commotions in the air, you got, well, even that also is volcanic eruptions, but mainly your gale force winds and tornadoes and those kind of things. Now listen, I'm going to go over a minute or two tonight. I want you to see this. We got some bad weather coming to the UK. Here's a story from there.
So here it comes again. A new year, but the same old weather crashing into Cornwall this evening. Well, tonight's high tide has been dramatic enough, but it's tomorrow morning that's causing greater concern, because then the winds will be stronger, the waves will be higher, and more coastal communities will be at risk.
People underestimate the power of the sea, and those waves, as well as being very heavy in water, they can contain rocks and all kinds of debris, which can injure you quite seriously.
Ministers are keen to avoid a repeat of this. The storms before Christmas left tens of thousands of angry homeowners without power for days. Many felt Britain had not been well enough prepared. So today the government's emergency committee met to make sure things are better this time.
Okay, friends, that gives you the gist of what's about to happen there in the UK. Bad weather on the way, all right? And we went a little bit over time tonight. I'll stop now and just say this. If any of you want the details of what I was just going into and alluding to about some of those things, any of those things, including Mr. Armstrong's verbatim words about the other ministers, just send me an email and I'll send you links to where you can see that with your own eyeballs for yourself. All right? And, friends, I love you all, and thank you for joining me tonight. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again Sunday. Our Thursday night, we break until Sunday. So if all is well and the creek hasn't frozen over, and God willing, again, we'll be back Sunday night. Until then, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.